The house that still smelled like Grandma. The gravel crunched beneath my shoes as I stepped out of the rental car, the evening sun sinking behind the tree line like it was trying to hide. Grandma's house stood at the end of the long, lonely road, quiet, still, and unchanged, almost as if it had been waiting for me. The air smelled like pine and old memories. And that was the first blow to my chest. Grandma's scent, soft lavender mixed with the faintest trace of cinnamon, still lingered on the breeze, even though she had been gone almost 4 months. I swallowed hard. It felt wrong to be here without her. It felt worse that I was here to pack her life into boxes. My fingers trembled as I slid the key into the lock. It was the same key I used to struggle with every summer as a kid. The metal turned with a soft click, and the door creaked open like the house was sighing after a long sleep. Inside, nothing had changed. Not one thing. The small wooden table by the entrance still held Grandma's ceramic bowl filled with fake fruit. The hallway runner, a faded Persian-style carpet she loved buying because it makes the house talk, was still in place. The faint hum of the old refrigerator echoed from the kitchen. Dust floated in the air like tiny ghosts, dancing in the evening light. It all hit me at once. The smell. The silence. The memories. This is home, Grandma always said. Even when you're grown, even when life pulls you away, this house will wait for you. But the house didn't feel like it had been waiting. It felt like it had been holding its breath. I stepped inside and closed the door behind me. The echoes sounded too loud, too final. I set my bag down and pulled in a long, shaky breath. "Okay, Grandma," I whispered. "I'm here. I'll take care of everything." Flashback. When I was 8, I spent an entire summer here after Mom got sick. Days filled with fireflies, pancakes, bedtime stories, and the warm, scratchy couch where I used to fall asleep next to Grandma while she knitted. She loved telling stories about her own childhood, usually funny ones, sometimes sad ones, and occasionally one of those stories that left the room strangely cold. She had a way of speaking that made even silence feel like part of the story. "Everything has a soul," she'd say, tapping her fingers lightly on the walls. "Houses, clocks, even memories. When you listen closely, they speak back." At that age, I thought she was being poetic. As an adult, I had learned to dismiss it as just one of her quirks, but standing in her house again, I wasn't so sure. Back to present. I walked into the living room. The grandfather clock hung on the far wall, tall and old, its wood scratched from years of being bumped by furniture and grandchildren. The brass pendulum reflected the orange glow of the sunset. The carved wooden hands were frozen at 3:12, the exact time Grandma died, according to the hospital. The clock had stopped that day, and it had never started again. Grandma loved this clock. She used to stand in front of it with her hands on her hips, watching the pendulum rock back and forth like it was alive. "This clock knows things," she'd whisper. "It's older than us, and wiser too." I never understood what she meant. I still didn't. I approached it now, gently brushing my fingers across its dusty surface. The metal was cold, colder than it should have been, as if it hadn't been touched by warmth in years. "You were her favorite," I murmured. "She would talk to you more than she talked to me sometimes." The house creaked. Just a wood-shifting sound, probably, but it felt like an answer. A shiver crawled up my spine. I walked toward the kitchen. Each step echoed too loudly in the empty silence. It felt like someone should have been trailing behind me, chatting about recipes, or telling me to grab more milk from the store. But the kitchen was empty. The table was still set with 2 plates, 2 cups, exactly the way I had left it the last time I visited. Just before she got sick, Grandma always insisted on setting the table for 2, whether I was coming or not. "Habit," she'd say. Or hope. They're the same thing. My stomach twisted. I didn't want to cry. Not yet. I needed to get through this weekend, without falling apart. I washed the cups, and placed them on the drying rack, out of sheer instinct. Then I grabbed the first cardboard box and headed toward the living room. But as soon as I placed the box on the floor, something strange happened. A soft, rhythmic tick, tick-tick, echoed behind me. I froze. Slowly I turned toward the wall, where the grandfather clock hung. The pendulum was moving. Back and forth. Steady. Perfect. Alive. My breath caught in my throat. The clock was running. I stepped toward it, each heartbeat pounding against my ribs. It wasn't possible. It had been broken for months. It died the moment Grandma did. I knew it, because I checked over and over again, trying to convince myself it wasn't some sign or message. But here it was. Ticking. Rhythmic. Strong. And the time was no longer 3:12. It now read 6:47 p.m., the exact minute I walked through the door. My hands shook violently. "No, that's not," I whispered, taking a step back. A sudden breeze swept through the room, even though all the windows were closed. The curtains fluttered. Papers rustled on the table. And then, a soft female whisper echoed from somewhere behind me. Finally, I spun around. No one was there. The room was empty. Silent. My heartbeat thundered in my ears. I forced a shaky laugh. "You're tired," I told myself. "You're emotional. You're hearing things." But my body didn't believe me. My skin prickled. My stomach knotted. Something felt wrong. I needed air. I stepped out onto the back porch, letting the cool breeze rush over my face. Fireflies glowed across the yard, tiny stars blinking in and out of existence. I sat down on the porch steps, took a deep breath, tried to calm myself. But then, memories came rushing in. One night, years ago, I woke up crying after a nightmare. I ran to find Grandma. She wasn't in bed. She was standing in front of the grandfather clock, whispering to it. Her eyes were red. Her hands were shaking. "Please, not tonight. Not yet," she whispered. When she noticed me, she forced a smile and tucked me into bed. But I heard her prayer-like whispering through the walls. Back then, I thought she had been talking to God. But now I wasn't so sure. Back inside. When I returned to the living room, the pendulum was still swinging, but slower this time, like the clock was tired. I stared at it for a long time. Something inside me resisted the urge to touch it again. Another part of me desperately wanted to. Finally, I reached out and rested my fingertips against the cold wood. Another whisper. Faint, barely audible, but definitely real. "Listen." I jerked my hand away. My heart pounded. My breathing turned shallow. The house felt different now. Like it wasn't empty at all. Like something unseen had woken up the moment I stepped inside. And I couldn't shake the feeling that Grandma's clock wasn't just telling time. It was telling me something else, something I wasn't ready to hear. The first night begins. I tried to sleep in my old childhood room, but the floorboards creaked with every step, and the shadows seemed longer than they should have been. The moonlight spilling through the window formed shapes on the floor I refused to look at for more than a second. At 1 a.m., I was still awake. At 2 a.m., I was praying for sleep. At 3:12 a.m., the exact minute Grandma died. Dong. A loud chime echoed through the house. I bolted upright. The grandfather clock had no chime. It never had one, not even when Grandpa was alive. But tonight it rang. And after the final chime faded, I heard footsteps in the hallway, slow, measured, coming closer. My breath caught. The doorknob rattled. Then stopped. Silence. My entire body froze. I didn't dare breathe. After a full minute, the footsteps faded, but the smell that drifted under my door. Lavender, cinnamon, warm, familiar. Grandma. Or something wearing her scent. And that was the moment I realized. This house wasn't waiting for me. It had been waiting for something else. And now, it had started. The clock that woke the house. I woke up with the taste of metal on my tongue and the heavy weight of dread pressing against my ribs. The room was dark, except for the slice of weak moonlight that spilled through the window and painted a cold line across the wooden floorboards. For a moment, everything felt still. Then the memory rushed over me like icy water. The chime. The footsteps. The lavender scent drifting under my door. I pushed myself upright slowly, my palms sweaty against the blanket. My ears strained for any sound, any movement, but the house was perfectly silent. Almost intentionally silent. I rubbed my hands over my face and let out a shaky breath. That didn't happen, I whispered to myself. But deep down, I knew it did. I swung my legs over the side of the bed and winced when the cold floor met my feet. My childhood room felt smaller than I remembered, almost suffocating. The old wallpaper, covered with fading blue flowers, seemed to close in with each breath. I glanced at the clock on the bedside table. 3:14 a.m. 2 minutes after the time Grandma died. 2 minutes after the time the house woke up. I stood, my knees trembling a little, and crept toward the door. My hand hovered over the doorknob. I half expected it to rattle again, like something on the other side wanted to come in. But it didn't. Finally, I twisted the knob and opened the door just enough to peek into the hallway. Dark. Empty. Quiet. Still, I could feel something lingering in the air. The way you know someone has just walked out of a room, even though you didn't see them leave. A leftover warmth. A faint disturbance. A presence. I stepped into the hallway, heart pounding, and looked toward the living room. The faintest glow of moonlight touched the edges of the furniture, just enough for me to trace their outlines. But it wasn't the furniture that made my breath hitch. It was the clock. The tall grandfather clock stood against the far wall, rigid and imposing. The pendulum was still swinging, slow, precise, alive. And the ticking, God, the ticking, echoed through the house with a steady, unnatural clarity. Tick, tick, tick. It sounded like the heartbeat of something enormous. And awake. I moved closer, not because I wanted to, because I had to. Something pulled me forward, the same way you can't stop yourself from staring at a fire even when it burns. The pendulum gleamed in the dim light, slicing through the shadows with each swing. I watched its arc, hypnotized, until... Creak. The house groaned behind me. I spun around. Nothing. Just darkness. But then the clock began ticking louder, 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 like it was trying to drown out something else. Or warn me. My pulse quickened. Grandma? The name slipped out before I could stop it. The house answered with another deep groan, as if the wooden beams themselves were shifting under the weight of something unseen. I turned back to the clock. The hands were moving, but not normally. Not smoothly. They jerked, stopped. Jerked again, like someone was forcing them. At 3:16 a.m., the minute hand twitched and froze, and in that exact moment, the room temperature dropped. Not gradually. Not naturally, instantly. My breath fogged in front of me. My skin prickled. My teeth began to chatter. What the? Then, dong. A single, deafening chime exploded from the clock. I stumbled backward, nearly falling over the coffee table behind me. The clock had no chime. It was never built with one. But now, it rang as if it had always been capable of screaming. My ears rang. I clutched my head, trying to steady my breathing. The floor vibrated under my feet. This isn't real, I yelled, though the sound died instantly in the cold air. But the clock didn't care. It began ticking again, but this time faster. Tick, 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 tick. Like panicked footsteps. I reached out, desperate to stop it, to silence it, to end whatever was happening. But the moment my fingers touched the wood, a shock surged through me. Not electric. Emotional. Like the house had shoved something directly into my head. A memory. No, not a memory. A vision. The vision. Grandma sitting alone at the kitchen table, head in her hands, tears dripping onto the wood, her voice cracking as she whispered, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I can't keep you here anymore." A shadow behind her. Tall, undefined, watching. The clock in the corner, swinging faster, faster, fast enough to blur. And then, Grandma turning toward me. Not the me in the room. The me in the memory. Her eyes were terrified. Don't let it out. The memory shattered like glass. I jerked backward from the clock, my chest burning, my eyes watering. I gasped for air like someone had held my head underwater. What was that? My voice trembled. No answer. But the house felt different now. Charged, humming, like it was holding electricity in its bones. The clock now read 3:17 a.m. 1 minute after the vision. The pendulum slowed and then stopped completely. Dead silence. I backed away slowly, hands trembling, trying to make sense of what I had seen. But my brain felt foggy, like someone had rearranged pieces of my memory without asking permission. I turned to walk back to my room, and froze. My bedroom door, the one I had left open, was now closed, and something scratched softly from the inside. SCRRR. SCRRR. Like nails on wood, like someone, or something, was trying to get out. My heart hammered. The air felt too thin. My legs threatened to give out. "Grandma?" I whispered. The scratching stopped. Complete silence. Then, tap. A single knock from the inside. My vision blurred with fear. No, no, no. Another tap, softer. Closer to a finger than a knuckle. It wasn't trying to scare me. It was trying to get my attention. I stepped back. My throat tightened. My breaths came too fast. The doorknob began to turn, slowly. Gently. Like someone was opening it with care. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over the hallway rug. My back hit the wall. The doorknob turned all the way, and stopped. The door didn't open. Something was waiting on the other side. Listening. Breathing. The house groaned again. Louder this time. The floorboards beneath me trembled. Then, faint, almost inaudible, came a whisper from behind the door. Not the voice from last night. Not Grandma. This voice was younger, lighter, sad. "Please help me." My stomach twisted. "Who's there?" I whispered. The voice didn't answer. Instead, the doorknob released with a soft click. And then, a shadow moved under the crack of the door. Slowly, crawling, reaching. That was enough. I bolted down the hallway, heart pounding so hard it hurt, and didn't stop until I was in the kitchen with the lights on. The house looked normal in the brightness. Too normal. But something had changed. I felt it. This house, Grandma's house, was no longer a place of memories. It was a place of warnings. And the clock wasn't the only thing that had come alive. Morning light doesn't help. When dawn finally came, I was still sitting at the kitchen table, arms wrapped around myself, eyes burning from exhaustion. But the world outside looked calm. Birds chirped, sunlight filtered through the trees. A breeze stirred the wind chimes on the porch. Normal, peaceful, fake. I forced myself to stand and walk back to the living room. The clock stood silently, its pendulum still. The hands were frozen at 3:17 a.m. A mockery. Or a message. I touched the wood again, cold, lifeless. Why are you doing this? I whispered, what do you want from me? My voice sounded small in the quiet room. The house didn't answer, but the walls felt like they were waiting, listening, breathing. And then, just as I stepped back, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. A small slip of yellowed paper wedged between the base of the clock and the wall. I kneeled and pulled it out. It was a torn journal page. Grandma's handwriting. Shaky, panicked. If the clock starts, you are not alone in the house. Follow the signals. Do not open the wrong door. My blood turned to ice. The wrong door. Which door? The guest room? The basement? My bedroom? And what did she mean by signals? Before I could think any further. Dong. A single chime echoed through the living room. The pendulum began to swing. Again. The house exhaled. And I realized, this wasn't just grief. This wasn't imagination. This wasn't emotional breakdown. Something was here. And it was just getting started. Footsteps, whispers, warnings. I didn't sleep the night the clock started ticking again. I tried. God knows I tried. But every time I closed my eyes, all I heard was that steady, unnatural rhythm. Tick, tick, tick. It was like the house had a heartbeat now, and it wasn't beating for me. By the time the sun rose, my eyes were burning and raw with exhaustion. My coffee tasted like metal, like fear had coated my tongue during the night. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the hallway where the grandfather clock stood hidden in shadow. I told myself I wouldn't look at it again. But my eyes kept drifting toward that dark hall like some instinct, wanted to keep watch. At 9:12 a.m., my hand was shaking so badly I almost dropped my mug. Because the footsteps started again. Light, slow, almost hesitant. Like someone was testing each step. I froze in my chair. No, I whispered. Not again. No one is here. But the footsteps kept moving, soft thuds against the old hardwood. Then a pause. Then one more step. They weren't coming from upstairs this time. They were right behind the wall I was sitting next to. I pressed my fingers against the wallpaper. It felt cold, as if something on the other side had drained the warmth out of it. The footsteps stopped. I held my breath. For a moment, there was only silence. Then, tap tap. Something tapped twice on the other side of the wall. Not loud, not aggressive. Just a signal. Like someone was letting me know, I know you're here. I shot up from the chair so fast it scraped loudly against the floor. My heart slammed painfully against my ribs as I backed away. No, not this, I whispered, clutching my sweater like it could protect me. The house went silent again, but the silence didn't feel empty anymore. It felt crowded. The first warning. Around noon, I found myself wandering into my old bedroom. I didn't mean to. My feet carried me there like I was sleepwalking. Everything was exactly where I left it at 19 years old. The posters on the wall, the scratched dresser, the tiny window looking over the backyard where my father used to mow the grass every Sunday morning. I stood there, feeling like a ghost in my own life. Then I heard it. A whisper. A woman's whisper. Soft. Urgent. Close. Don't open it. I spun so fast I almost tripped. No one was in the room. My scalp prickled. The air behind me felt disturbed, like something had moved through it. Don't open what? I choked out. Silence. I slowly backed out of the room, keeping my eyes on the corners like something might be crouched there. When I stepped into the hallway, something else happened that made my blood run cold. The door behind me moved. Not fully, not enough to slam. Just a gentle push. A reminder. Like the room was telling me, you weren't supposed to go in there. The second warning. That night, around 7 p.m., the power flickered. Not the whole house, just a single lamp in the living room. It blinked twice. Then a voice followed. Raspy, thin, like wind being pushed through a throat that wasn't there anymore. He's coming back. I dropped the remote and stumbled backward. No, I whispered, shaking my head. No one is coming back. No one even knows I'm here. The lamp blinked again. He does. My legs nearly gave out. Who? I shouted, my voice cracking from fear. But the house didn't answer. This time, the silence felt afraid, like the house itself was holding its breath. The footsteps in the hallway. It was 11 p.m. when the footsteps started again. But these weren't like the ones I heard earlier. These weren't cautious. They were confident, steady, walking directly toward my bedroom door. I sat up in bed, clutching the blanket against my chest, my whole body shaking. Stop, stop, stop. I repeated the words in my mind like a prayer. But the footsteps didn't stop. They grew louder, closer. Outside my door, the doorknob twitched. And I swear on my mother's grave, it turned half an inch to the right. Someone tried to open it. I held my breath so hard my lungs burned. "Please," I whispered. "Please go away." The doorknob went still. Then, after a long, unbearable pause, 3 slow knocks. Knock, knock, knock. I slapped a hand over my mouth to stop myself from screaming. The footsteps moved away eventually. Slow, dragging, like the thing on the other side wasn't walking, but pulling itself. The third warning. The clock talks. At 3:14 a.m., I heard the clock. Not ticking, speaking. The voice was deep, muffled, like someone was pressing their mouth directly against the wood. Soft words, barely audible, but I heard them. I heard them clearly. "He's almost here." Then, "You shouldn't have come alone." My knees buckled. I grabbed the wall for support. No, no, no. My chest tightened, and tears filled my eyes. The house wasn't just haunted. It was trying to warn me. The shadow in the doorway. I tried to leave the house. God knows I tried. I grabbed my keys. I opened the front door, but when I stepped onto the porch, I froze. Because someone, a tall, dark silhouette, was standing at the very end of the driveway. Not moving. Not breathing. Just watching. The streetlight flickered behind him, making it impossible to see his face. My breath turned to ice in my throat. "Hello?" I whispered. The figure didn't answer. It tilted its head, slowly, unnaturally, like a puppet with a broken neck. That was enough. I slammed the door shut and locked all 3 bolts. I stumbled back, shaking, staring at the door like it might open on its own. Whoever, or whatever, it was. It knew I was here. It was waiting, and the house was trying desperately to tell me something before it arrived. The final warning of part 3. At dawn, I went to check the grandfather clock. I don't know why. Maybe because I hoped the night had been a dream. Maybe because I needed to know if the voice was real. The clock was silent again, frozen at the exact time it spoke, 3:14 a.m. But there was something new, scratched into the wood. Deep. Violent. Like someone had carved it with a shaking hand. 2 words. "Don't trust." But the last word was completely scratched out. Gouged so deep, the wood splintered. I touched the grooves with trembling fingers, and the house whispered behind me. "You're running out of time." My knees almost buckled. Who was he? Why was he coming? Why did the house seem afraid of him? And most terrifying of all, why did I feel like I already knew him? I stood frozen in the hallway, the ticking of the old clock echoing like a heartbeat that didn't belong in the house anymore. The footsteps had stopped, the whispers had faded, but the presence, it was still here. Watching, listening, waiting. My chest rose and fell in short, sharp breaths as I slowly reached for the bedroom door. The door that had clicked shut on its own just minutes ago. My fingers trembled, the old brass knob icy cold, as if someone had been holding it from the other side. I pushed it open. The room was dark, but the moonlight coming through the window outlined everything in a dull silver haze. And there, right in the center of the room, the old clock sat upright on the floor, ticking steadily. Even though no one had wounded it, my voice shook. "Who's here?" The silence stretched in a way that didn't feel empty. It felt crowded. Then, knock, from the wall. Not the door. The wall. 3 soft, deliberate taps, like someone gently trying to get my attention rather than frighten me. My throat tightened. I don't want any trouble. I just want to understand, why now? Why me? The air shifted. It wasn't colder. It was heavier, sadder. As if the house itself had exhaled a memory it had been holding for years. And suddenly, a faint whisper behind me. "You came back." I spun around. No one there, but I felt someone, right over my shoulder. Close enough to touch. My heartbeat tripped. "Show yourself," I said, though my voice barely registered. "Please, I know you're trying to tell me something." The door shut behind me with a soft thud. I didn't scream. I didn't run, because the energy in the room wasn't violent. It was grieving. The clock gave one final, heavy talk, and then the ticking stopped completely. And then, the sound of a woman crying. Not loud. Not dramatic. But heartbreaking, like someone remembering something they wished they could forget. I turned toward the sound. It was coming from the old wardrobe. My pulse thudded in my ears as I walked toward it. Each step felt like walking deeper into a past that didn't belong to me. "Who are you?" I whispered. The crying stopped. And then, in the softest, most human voice I'd heard all night, I tried to protect her, but I failed. I froze. Her? Who was she talking about? Before I could ask, the wardrobe door creaked open on its own, just a few inches, but enough for the moonlight to fall inside. My breath hitched when I saw something tucked into the corner. A photograph. Old, crumpled, half-burned at the edges. I picked it up with trembling hands. A little girl stood smiling on the porch of this very house. And next to her, a woman holding her shoulders. The woman's face was faded, almost smudged by time. But the little girl, my stomach twisted. It was me, a childhood memory I didn't recall. A moment I had forgotten so completely that it felt impossible. I whispered, What is this? The room suddenly felt colder. And then the voice came again, closer now, heavy with regret. You left her behind. My mind raced, my heart shaking inside my chest. Left who behind? Left what behind? I turned toward the sound, and the shadow in the corner seemed to stretch upward, shaping into a weak outline of a woman, soft, fragile, flickering like a candle flame. Who are you? I asked again, voice cracking. The shadow pressed a trembling hand against the wall, as if the weight of her own existence was too much. I tried to save you, she whispered. But when the fire started, your mother took you and ran. She thought I was behind her. She didn't know I went back inside to look for you. My breath vanished. My voice trembled. You were our neighbor, the babysitter, the woman who disappeared during the fire. A soft, broken sob filled the room. I didn't disappear. I died trying to get to you. Tears pricked my eyes. The air quivered with her sorrow. She continued, voice fading. This house, it wouldn't let me leave. I stayed because I needed to know if you survived. My hand flew to my mouth as I whispered. I did. I'm here. I'm alive. The shadow softened, almost collapsing in relief. Then I can finally rest. The wardrobe creaked shut on its own. The air warmed, and the presence, the weight, the sadness, the whispers, slowly drained away like mist in sunlight. But then, just as the room returned to silence, a child's voice whispered behind me. Don't go. She's not the only one still here. I spun around. The room was empty, but the old clock started ticking again, and the hands were turning backwards.